All right, good evening. Thank you all for being here and being flexible on time changes as we try to make sure that as many members as possible are able to attend. Some members may come and go, although we definitely have one here that is here. Others may need to leave because they have other meetings they need to attend to, but we appreciate the effort that everyone has made to be here. And then we will have one, Alex Donahue will be here virtually. So we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
So our first order of business is to approve the minutes and member attendance for the August 1st meeting. Before I take a motion, I just wanted to let the public know that our meetings are announced on FCPS board docs and through Find Out First. They are recorded.
School Messenger now.
And which is it?
Messenger now.
And School Messenger. Is that what Find Out First is now? Okay, thank you. And School Messenger. I'm showing my age. They are recorded and the minutes are taken. The video is usually posted about a week after the meeting is held. And as this is a holiday weekend, it may take a little longer. And we appreciate FCPS and Board of Ed staff that are here to support us, especially Catherine Rich with the minutes. And so is there any questions on the minutes or Senator?
I'd like to make 2 corrections. I'll do the easy one first. My last name is not hyphenated. That's the easy one. Okay, under election of chair, co-chairs, the 1, 2, 3rd paragraph, it says, her understanding of the work group was that Frederick County has done an excellent job, but there is a change. I know we want to consolidate meeting minutes, but I think that's a bit too brief. What I said was, but given rapid growth, inflation, and other factors, we need to explore supplemental funding strategies. Given that's the mission of this group, I think we need a little bit more verbiage than just, there's a change.
And then, so for the public to know, these are a little bit of summary, although they were very, very good reflection of our meeting. The whole 2 hours and 18 minutes is on there for everyone to see, and it's all recorded, but I'm fine. Is the group fine with making that change to the minutes? Sure. Okay. Do I have a motion with the change?
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
All right, and all in favor? All right, thank you. And then now we're going to finish up some of our discussion on the prior school construction work groups. And so we will turn it over at Dr. Lebo and Ms. Spiegel, I don't know, and then for Executive Director Donahue, however you guys want to do this.
So it's okay, we're going to have Ms. Spiegel kick us off with participation from Frederick County, and then Mr. Donahue is going to chime in with some of the state's perspective, but I think is what you'll see is there's a lot of overlap. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to just start talking about what has happened for about the last 10 years. So Paul, if you don't mind going to the second, thank you. We'll just leave that up there the whole time. So this is the timeline, and it's about the last 10 years, and that's about the time that I started with the county. So that's as far as, I mean, there was a previous group before that, but at that point we're dating ourselves. So we'll start with the last about 10 years. So in November 2015, shortly after County Executive Gardner was elected, she decided to host a roundtable discussion with the then IAC Director, David Lever, and our FCPS Chief Operating Officer at that time, Ray Barnes, to talk with the community about what we were starting to see related to school construction. And for those of you who lived in Frederick County at the time, you may remember that our Frederick High School project at that time increased by $30 million over the course of 1 year. So between 2014 and 2015, it went up by $30 million. And we were trying to get a handle on why. Some of the reasons were legislative, like there were some changes in legislation that were starting to be impacting. The other thing is we were seeing big jumps and increases in certain construction packages, specifically our mechanical and certain packages electrical at the time. And we weren't really sure why, so we started with a roundtable discussion. So that's really what started that. And from that effort in 2015, that turned into a Frederick County school construction roundtable work group that started right around in 2016. And just so you can see from this chart, all of the ones highlighted in yellow were state-sponsored groups, and the ones that are in blue were county local sponsored groups. So that kind of will help you get your orientation a little bit. So recognizing that statewide increases in school construction costs will ultimately reduce the number of projects that we got done here in Frederick County, Executive Gardner created this school construction work group in March 2016. And you may remember at that time, that group was chaired by Mike Marshner, who was working with the county as a special projects manager. And that group did include FCPS representatives, Ray Barnes and Joe DeToli, who've been around a long time, and Roger Fritz. And then right around that time, Ray retired and Paul joined our group, and we finished up that group at that time. So the group was charged with evaluating the cost of school construction in Frederick County with the goal of reducing costs between 8 and 10%. And then looking at different processes such as the bidding process, construction management approach, project design, looking at specific bid packages and methodologies, and considering value engineering for our projects, and then considering if we needed to make some legislative changes. So that group issued their final report in in early 2017, and many of their recommendations were then shared on the NOT Commission, which was the next group that came up. But I do want to let you know that linked to your agenda today are all the final reports of all of these groups that are listed on here. So I'm not going to go over all of the final recommendations. You can certainly do that on your time. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of each of them. So in the NOT Commission, or more formally known as the 21st Century School Facilities Commission, was appointed by the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House at the time. In January 2016, that appointment was made. And the purpose of that committee was to review all aspects of the school construction process by which the state facilities are designed, funded, built, and maintained. And then to set ourselves up for modernizing 21st century school facilities is what we were really looking at. And locally in Frederick County, members of that committee included County Executive Jan Gardner, then Delegate Galen Claggett, FCTA President at the time Gary Brennan, and then of course FCPS's COOs, either Ray or Paul, attended all those meetings, and I attended those meetings as well. And I'll let Alex and chime in a minute, but just so you know, the commission began meeting in April of 2016. They held 8 meetings before issuing an interim report. And then they resumed their work in July 2017. And over those 2 years of work that the commission did, they met a total of 17 times before issuing their final report in December 2017. And I have that a link to your agenda. And I do want to mention that a lot of the local ideas that came from our original school construction roundtable work group did make it to the NOT Commission in the form of final recommendations, including the part about incentives that we use today and that we have been the beneficiary of. So we were pretty happy that that work helped to formulate some of the NOT Commission's work. So Alex, can you hear me?
I can you hear me?
Yes. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you summarized it quite well. I think just the nutshell is that the state has done work groups and commissions to explore the issues and needs around school facilities periodically since 1970. And the NOT Commission in 2017 was IAC expanded its mission and made provisions for key ingredients to the state's approach to supporting school facilities over the coming years, which were the establishment of minimum efficiency standards for school facilities and the establishment of the statewide facilities assessment of condition and educational sufficiency, which was begun in late 2020, which is now an ongoing perennial part of the IAC's operations, provide data on condition that's refreshed at the annual basis. And so now we have a lot more tools to support identifying what the needs are, where they are, how to best address them. I hope that is helpful. If you have any other questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah, so basically, as Alex said, what happened is from the Knott Commission, we formed House Bill 1783, which everybody might remember that number, and that was the 21st Century School Facilities Act, and that was in the spring of 2018. And part of that act, it formed two work groups to further work on the issues. The first work group, the work group on educational development specifications, started their meetings in 2018 and met through May 2019. And they were reviewing specific processes that relate to the early planning and funding of school construction projects, including square footage allocations, design standards, cost per square foot, state rated capacities, and construction costs per student. So our own Bob Wilkinson at the time, who was the Director of Maintenance and Operations for Frederick County Public Schools, was a member of that committee. So we yet again had a Frederick County representation. And then the second work group, so they finished their work, and again, their report is attached to your agenda if you want to look at it. It's relatively short. The second work group that was created was the Assessment and Funding of School Facilities Work Group. And this group was created to review the results from the facilities assessment, the first statewide facility assessment that had been done in some time, and then collaborate how we could work those into our funding decisions. So that work group began meeting in 2019, and they had 6 meetings. And initially, that group was chaired by State Superintendent Karen Salmon, and that also included County Executive Gardner, who was representing MACO, and Brad, weren't you on that committee representing MABE at the time? So, and Brad was the president of the Board of Education at the time. So, but because there was some delays in the procurement plot process for that facilities assessment, that work group was unable to complete their recommendations in the time frame that was outlined back in House Bill 1783. So they did issue an interim report, and then in 2020, the legislature extended that work group's timeline. And I know I'm giving a very high overview, but they extended the timeline so that they had until December 1st, 2021 to complete their charge, which they did. And that group was reformed to be under chair, at the time, Delegate Maggie McIntosh, who was the chair, and Jan Gardner was also on that committee. So also, and the work groups, both of those work groups, the educational development specifications and the assessment and funding final report are attached to your agenda. Also in 2019, Executive Gardner created a local adequate public facilities advisory council. And the chair of that group was to evaluate data specifically related to public school capacities, school enrollments, and growth trends in Frederick County, so that that group could analyze the data and get an idea of where we were heading, and then report back to the executive so that it would help her formulate her budget projections in March. And that was the intention of that group, and we did issue an annual report by March 30th, that first year in 2019 when we met, and then we started meeting in 2020. We had one meeting in March where we all sat 6 feet, well, actually at the time it was only 3 feet apart because COVID was just starting and nobody really knew where we were going, and then we shut down for a period of time. And that group never reformulated after COVID. So we had moved on into other directions and it just did not come back in.
Is there any part of that group that is still advising the county executive, or is there any?
I chaired that group. I advise the county executive all the time. So yeah, I mean, we analyze all the data. We do it on a regular basis. All of the, we meet regularly. And
Is there any kind of report that you do or information that would, like the latest information that would be helpful, or any trend information that would be helpful for the work group?
just regular enrollment reports that we get quarterly, and all of the housing pipeline reports, which are on our website monthly, and we analyze that data all the time. Just regularly.
The other piece is the story map that I mentioned the last time that's on the EFMP website. That's, the county website is great. It is a plethora of data. It's for us data nerds that love it. So it's great information. I think the story map that our facilities planning team put together is a little more user friendly. I'll make sure that's not a knock on the county. It's phenomenal information, but it's data, and I think ours sort of tells the story a little bit. So, but that's in the resources that were included in my presentation.
Okay.
So that adequate public, we called it the APF Advisory Council. So the APF Advisory Council included Mr. Young, who was, again, president of the Board of Ed at the time. Dr. Lebo was on there. Councilmember MC Keegan-Air was there. We had reps from our city planning department, our county planning department, and we also had reps from, we had general public, two members from the general public, and a representative from the Frederick County Building and Industry Association. So we met, like I said, through 2019, issued a report, started meeting in 2020, got shut down for COVID, and then that group never was reformed because it, again, that was charged by the county executive, and she just moved into a different direction. So, and then in 2021, we already talked about that second part of the assessment and funding work group that got back together and was chaired by Delegate McIntosh. And then in 2023, we have a new county executive, Executive Fitzwater, formed the School Construction Financing Ad Hoc Work Group. At some point, we're going to call these, like we started numbering our schools, we're going to start numbering our work groups. It's getting a little bit hard to come up with new names. So this was the School Construction Financing Ad Hoc Work Group. And we were formed to examine issues related to school construction and a potential for legislative solutions for additional school funding. Originally, that group was chaired by Joy Schaefer, who was the Director of Government Affairs until her retirement, and then I took that over. And that group included Karen Yoho, Ray Gallagher, Adnan Mamoon, Dr. Lebo, and Jennifer Peterson, who works on our capital projects on this county side. The recommendations from this group were included in the county executive Fitzwater's legislative initiatives last year, and that was to increase our funding contribution from the state to $600 million annually from approximately $300 million. And how the group came up with that is one of the recommendations from the Knott Commission was to increase it to 400. And when you escalate that according to the cost of school construction all the way through, it's exactly how we got to 600. And now you'll see when we come out with our legislative initiatives proposed by the Board of Ed, which was just linked to their agenda last night, it's now 618 because the cost of school construction went up 3% for 2026. And that pretty much brings us to where we are today with our House Bill 1016 School Construction Work Group. We'll call that group 1, 2, 3. And I'll let Paul jump in, or Alex if they want to jump in. That's where you can find everything linked. You should be able to get to them all on your agenda.
And they're on board docs as well.
Yeah.
I have a question. Did any of these work groups, either at the local level or the state level, have conversations about alternative financing strategies, either public-private partnerships or going out to the private equity market in some capacity. Did that topic come up at all?
Not that I can remember in any great detail.
I agree.
I mean, the county forward funds
Right.
the state share of school construction, and the county has not had a problem forward funding the state's share of school construction, so we haven't looked at a different entity to fund our contribution.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that's a follow-up question I have. Prince George's County, maybe this question belongs later, does not forward fund.
Right.
So can you explain to me how forward funding may or may not interact with developing public-private partnerships? Is it irrelevant, or could it be a barrier?
Well, let me explain how Frederick County does it for right now, and then I'll let Alex, if you could hear me, I'll let you jump in and talk about Prince George's County. So,
Sure, so thanks.
in Frederick County, the way that we do it is we receive the request from the Board of Education somewhere around October. It has to be into the state by the beginning of October, and it's usually to us by the end of October. So we get the request, and then we begin to look at what funding sources, that's that color of money that we talked about the last time we met, what funding sources we have to fund the projects in the priority order listed by the Board of Education. And we do try to stick with their priority order. At that point in October, we haven't even touched on what the state funding will be, because the state doesn't finalize their funding until about May. So it's really coming up with making sure that we can plug in the total project amounts in the order that the Board of Education is asking, and that's how we do our funding. What happens over the course of time is that once the IAC makes their funding recommendations, they'll do it at the 90% level in December, and the 75% level in December, the 90% level generally around February, and then they come out with their hundreds in May. Once we know if a project is receiving state funding either at the 75 or the 90%, we start to plug that into our formula. But we never get the full amount of the state funding for a project all at one time. It comes over the course of several years. So for Frederick County, by forward funding, and I'll just use as an example, the Ballinger Creek limited renovation. Well, that's actually a bad example, because the state actually did give us a whole big, huge lump all at one time. Thank you, Alex. But anyway, and thank you, Mike. The Spring Ridge limited renovation. So if, let's say the total project cost for that Spring Ridge limited renovation was $12 million. At the time, the state might give us $1 million in year one, and a couple $1 million in year two, and a couple $1 million in year three, and that will equal their full share. But in order for FCPS to go to bid for that project, all the funding has to be upfront, so that we have that funding in place, which is why we forward fund, to allow them to go to bid in year one and get that project moving. That's how it works in Frederick County. Alex, do you want to talk about how it worked in Prince George's County without a local forward funding share?
Sure. Thank you. In a nutshell, forward funding does not really connect with the alternative financing, or has not to date. Essentially, forward funding is used by some counties and school districts, and is a very important tool that helps those districts move more projects forward more quickly than is possible in the jurisdictions that do not forward fund. And so really it stands separate from alternative financing.
answer your question?
I think so.
We'll talk more about, I think we're talking about that in the next.
Putting PG County in their perspective for me.
That's it.
Paul, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Nope, you covered it.
Oh, we left off one, there was another committee.
There was, and again, it wasn't a formal work group, but the IAC staff had coordinated a group of staff from across the state from various LEAs to talk about the impact of Blueprint and the establishment of gross area baselines for schools design at the elementary, middle, and high school level. FCPS participated in that as well, and that led to the recommendations that were ultimately approved by the IAC. So again, just highlighting that nothing is really done in a vacuum across the state. We don't do anything in a vacuum. We collaborate with our county and state partners. The state, the IAC in particular, collaborates with locals prior to submission to the IAC for approval. And that has been historically how it is done, and I would argue it has actually gotten better over the last decade, where there's been more and more collaboration across the entities.
Was that report linked to about the IAC one, with the impact of the blueprint?
I did not. I can link to the IAC on the IAC website.
On the IAC website, okay. Can we get that link?
Sure.
Okay. Because that would be interesting to see. Thank you. Okay. So does that, do you guys want to, do you want to go ahead and do the next topics, and then we'll talk about work group strategy after that? I think that makes a little bit more sense as I'm looking at it. Okay. All right. So when we're moving into this discussion, I want to talk about for a second, because I had a lot of calls this week. The purpose of the work group is we are looking to explore, evaluate solutions to balance both the fiscal demands and the educational needs, as well as consider cost-saving, cost-sharing opportunities to meet the priorities of the Frederick County school construction priorities. And so in order to do that, we have to talk openly and candidly about the reality of the situation that we're in and some of the reasons that have brought us to the point that we're at, whether it's from an economic, a legislative, state, county, FCPS, or even a municipality perspective. So we need to be open to looking at strategies or evaluating new ideas and solutions that may impact us at all or at any of those levels. We are only a recommending body, no authority for implementation at all whatsoever. And we all represent different viewpoints and expertise, and that's very important for us here for generating ideas. FCPS is just responding to the situation that we have all here at this table had a hand in creating for them. They have no funding authority, and they have to provide the seats for the students, and they have to maintain a safe and appropriate educational environment. And with the age of a lot of our buildings, it's becoming very, very difficult. So the solution that we just have to ask the county or state for more money, while we all know that we need it, it's not really a viable option anymore in and of itself. And it's a huge impact and issue across the state and across the nation. The 2021 numbers from across the nation where there's an $85 billion funding capital gap, and which I'm sure is incredibly higher even now in 2024. So I just wanted to kind of put that in perspective as we talk about the work group strategy and we talk about past options. There's not a blame assignment. We're looking for solutions for the future, not anybody's particular role in it, but how we're gonna move forward. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about that, and if you guys want to take it away.
Sure. So one of the topics we heard from the work group members was what is this discussion on public-private partnerships or alternative financing options? And so wanted to bring a very brief overview to the work group to talk briefly about P3, and certainly FCPS staff has done a lot of work in this area and can certainly come back with additional details, but thought this would be a good primer. And then if if it was the desire of the work group, we'd be glad to come back in more detail. So I think it helps to start with a definition. what is a P3? And simply, it's just a contract between some entity that has money that would like to fund a project for a government entity, and then you enter into that said contract, and we'll get to it here in a second, but the terms of that contract and what that looks like, is it just, they're going to finance it and design and build it? Are they going to operate and maintain it? How does all of that, that's all part of the structure potentially of a P3. So that's the very simple overall definition of what a P3 is. How can it be utilized? You might see P3s in a variety of things, anything from airports, highways, wastewater facilities, sports facilities is another common one, and schools. And this is a model that is used not only in the United States, but many of our European colleagues use P3 models as well for their school construction and other projects as well. So this is where I'm going to dive into a little bit of the meat of options for P3, because again, people will throw the term out. And let's start with what traditionally, if somebody says P3, what do they mean? And I think the market, and Alex, I think would agree with this, the market would tend to land and say, when we think of P3, we think of this DBFOM, design, build, finance, operate, and maintain, right? That gives them not only, they're going to bring money to bear at the front of the project, right? They're going to then build it, and then they're going to operate and maintain that. So things like custodial care over the lifespan of that contract, and then they will maintain that facility as well for an annual cost associated with it. So this is where it's enticing for private entities because there is a revenue generation opportunity for them over multi-years. Oftentimes it's 25 to 30 years for that typical contract period for design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. The company that you want to partner with is going to have to figure out how to make sure that the model works for them in terms of they're not going to go broke on the deal, but they're bringing money on the front end too. That then is the question of, does that actually save money for the government entity in the long run? Yes.
So this would be similar to what our charter schools are doing, correct? Because they went to an existing facility, but somebody built it, designed it, fitted it out. They're paying rent on it. The building owner maintains it, and it's basically it's like paying rent with a fit out.
So I would just add that I think it's different, unfortunately, in all of our charters.
I'm thinking more like the ones that are over on the St. John property.
So that is that's just a typical lease structure. They have no stake or ownership in that facility. They don't own anything.
So you're saying under this one, they still have ownership?
Correct. The Board of Ed, as the property owner, would own whatever property that is. There would just be a long-term contractual obligation that the board would have to fund the payback period. So it's sort of, in more simple terms, it's your mortgage payment and then all of the costs associated with operating that building until the end of the contract period.
Rent to own.
Yes.
Simple rent to own.
More similar to this, except for we operate and we maintain this. This was more of a design, build, finance model, which is what we did for this, and now we have a monthly payment associated with that.
Is that the DBFM?
That is DBF,
Just
design,
DBF.
build, finance. Yep. And I actually have a cheat sheet that I'd be glad to share with the group. I'll have it posted. My apologies.
I love about the state and county. They all use these. Like whatever. Okay.
So DBFM, again, we're sort of getting to where this is how you're figuring out how you're going to finance it and what is advantageous to the market. This is another option where you can design, build, finance, and maintain, but FCPS could operate. So things like our custodial care, we could manage that in-house. That's a structure that exists as well. So then,
Paul, before you go off there,
yes.
I understand the vertical axis. I'm not sure I understand segmented versus integrated, the horizontal axis on that left side there, what that means.
So it is easiest described with there is a greater partnership, an integrated partnership as you get over here where we're going to live, breathe, and function in whatever facility is constructed, and the contractor that we have a contract with is going to do all of the things behind the scene to make it work. Segmented meaning there's more sort of clear delineations in responsibility, and you're not operating and living together in those entities. And as you get further to the left, we typically operate in this area, which is the design bid build. And I could talk for hours on design, because design bid build in and of itself doesn't specifically mean that. We use construction manager at risk as an example, right? They help us through the design bid build process, or you can still have an outside entity that supports that. And then, so sorry, if I could just jump back out. We talked about that design bid, finance and maintain, and then design bid finance. We have talked to other entities. You have to really find the right partner for this. There's a lot of risk for the financing entity on this, because they're making their payback in figuring out how do we have a 30-year guaranteed income stream, to cover their costs over the long term. So you can make a design build finance work, but it will be more challenging. Again, please don't. I'm just trying to be as candid. We're not opposed to any of this. I just trying to, knowing what our experience, both internal and external, has been. I think that could be somewhat problematic. But we did it in essence for this building, so the market might exist again for that to work. Design, build, operate, maintain. I don't think we would ever do, because we don't have the money. That's where our problem is, right? So, but you could do that, right? You could have an outside entity if the government entity had the funding available. They had trouble with design services and maybe had trouble with operating and maintaining. That's a model that exists that would be considered under this P3 umbrella. And then,
One quick question.
Yes.
Back to this building, design, build, finance. Obviously, this building, the finance part is being paid from operating dollars.
Correct.
Does the state capital structure allow for dollars to be used for that? Is that why? Is it prohibited, or is that something that would require a change?
I believe, and Alex, correct me, that it is eligible to use state capital funding for the payback period, because that's what they're doing with Prince George's County's round 2. There is a state participation, and I believe they're using capital funds, not any operating revenues for that. Is that correct, Alex?
So they're using, yes, the state contribution to the Prince George's Phase 2 P3 is actually funding that comes from revenue bonds that are sold by the Maryland Stadium Authority, and the debt service for those bonds are paid with lottery funds that come through the Education Trust Fund. And that arrangement was made by the General Assembly as a component of the Built to Learn Act, in which every county received a piece of the Built to Learn funding, except for Prince George's, which had its portion of the Built to Learn funding essentially funneled through this Stadium Authority bond vehicle.
So, Alex, be clear, so they're using that stadium funding, but if you wanted to go to the state and say, we want capital money that we're going to use for paying this debt service over 5 years, either give it to us up front or pay over. This is a unique situation that you're doing. It's not through the typical process, correct?
And so what's unique about the Prince George's arrangement is that funding has been set up as a special carve-out from the lottery-funded Education Trust Fund, and not through normal state geo bonding. So it's not a traditional state capital funding arrangement, and theoretically speaking, I suppose the state could choose to provide a state share to the county's P3 using either operating funds or capital dollars. I believe that the option is open to the state to use either, and I can't say what led the General Assembly to choose what it did with the Prince George's, but that was set up.
The second one is set up that way. But the first one, they did not take a state share.
Correct. It's all locally funded.
Correct. The first one was fully locally funded, right?
100% local.
Was on that, so, no, if they were to compare the total cost, without state funding, so they're bearing the total cost, but presumably maybe it's a lower cost. How did that comparison look for G? Did they wind up paying more than if we did rely on?
Yeah.
They relied, yes,
There's interest in there. There's,
yes.
That's kind of what I
You're
thought.
financing it over the course of 30 years as opposed to.
And sometimes your financing deals are not great, like with this building, the
It's
finance.
commercial financing, not governmental
Good.
financing.
And very hard to get out of.
And I think if Mrs. Yoho was here, because they've talked about it at MABE, Prince George's for the first deal, not the second deal, which has just recently been signed, so that hasn't really, just starting. But the first deal, there has been some hardship at Prince George's in terms of their amount that they have to take out of the operating budget at the same time that they're trying to do their blueprint obligation. And it's created quite a bit of stress.
Are we going to get into some of the details of these lessons learned? Discussion.
If they share
not
them,
today.
if they share them also.
Maybe not today, because that's a longer discussion.
Can I ask you a question on the quadrant two that follows the line of questioning? Well, first of all, thank you for this. I think that CPS has done a lot more exploration on these concepts than we realized. Secondly, are there any other examples that we know of, other than PG County, that we could look at to compare the total cost of operating in the upper right-hand quadrant versus the lower left-hand to understand the cost differential?
So the quick answer is no, not that I'm aware of. I don't believe any other LEA in Maryland has. And I was going to get to this at the end, but Senator, I appreciate the question because it's a good discussion point here as well. So one of the other challenges in discussing options for P3, if anybody tells you that you can just sort of talk about, oh, it's going to be great, it's going to save us money, or it's going to cost us more money, I would tell you that they haven't done their homework and they probably don't understand P3s very well, right? You really need to dive into your very specific set of circumstances for your entity to be able to understand what that impact would be on your total cost of ownership. So let me talk about Prince George's County for a second, and then I'll make it relevant to Frederick County. Prince George's infrastructure age is significantly older than Frederick County. So what you have to do when you look at this financing model over the 30-year period is you have to say, if I have building A, and I can build it now, and then I have building B, and I know based on our current funding model, I'm not going to be able to build it for 8 years. What are all of my operations and maintenance costs that are going to be factored into that 8-year period? Have we reached the end of life on things like our boilers and our chillers and our plumbing and our electric? There's going to be some cost to operate the building, right? So then you have to do this cost-benefit analysis of, if I had the money to build it at the same time as building A, what would, when I get to the end of 30 years, what would my total cost be? And that's where I say you have to be very specific with how you look at this. So as an example, if the work group said, what would it cost and how would this be structured for Brunswick, Middletown, Walkersville to do this as a consolidated project? That's the level of work that staff would have to look at, right? If I know I'm not going to get to Walkersville High School reasonably for 20 years based on our existing, and this is all hypothetical, please don't hold me to these numbers, right? What is that going to look like? If we can follow the county's current path for the replacement of Brunswick High School, what is that cost going to be in those out years, and what will inflation now cost for Walkersville High School 20 years from now? And it's not a simple math equation. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and then so that's where you get your mathematical formula on what the total cost of ownership. But it is unfortunate in some ways that you have to be super specific. You can't just generalize. You can't even say just 3 elementary schools or 5 elementary schools. am I replacing something or am I going new? And what, so we could dive in to the cost area. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's kind of like a PG, I think there are 8 schools, are going to really be like 14 schools because of replacements and stuff like that. So it wasn't just 8 schools. It was,
Yes, sir. Yep. So that's another complexity factor to factor in. So now if I'm downsizing and I now have less to maintain, how does that all factor into that total?
and there's 14 pages of information on their piece. 14,000 pieces of information.
Oh, 14 pages, that's
Yeah, 14,000.
Yeah, 14,000?
Yeah, 14.
And then-
In one night reading. That was,
So the idea of the P3 and to be able to finance at that scale would be, like they're doing in Prince George's, to go from one to the other in a smaller time frame so that you don't have those extended operating costs and you can save economies that way.
And they did some prototype design, which we already do as well, but that allowed them to get through their design process faster as well. One of the other things that you would have to consider, and this is where we would rely on the market, you also want to make sure that you have the resources available. I can tell you now, if we did 3 high schools simultaneously, I don't think there's the market. I would love to be wrong, but that's a lot of manpower in addition to all the other work that's going on. So you have to make sure the market can support, right? So is it sequentially, and how is that structured? And that's where you get into these contract discussions with private firms who know the market, they're living, breathing it. How could they structure it? That would all be part of that discussion as well.
something like that, you may drive up costs
You're making inflation.
for yourself.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's one of the things
We can
we.
against each other for air conditioning. Yeah. You know, so.
Excellent point.
May I make an observation on this?
Oh, yes, sir.
On the next slide.
On the advantages.
Yeah, in our previous discussion, Janice, about forward funding, aside from the risk transfer, don't we get all of these benefits from forward funding on the advantages side?
Cost management, well, we don't have a third party, so, yes, yeah. Yeah, and we definitely accelerate our timelines, and we definitely, that's the one thing that had, remember that timeline with all those work groups? One consistent theme from every single one of those work groups that we've had, I don't care if it's at the state or locally, time is money in school construction. The faster we do it, the cheaper it's gonna be. It goes from, you're putting that facility into your portfolio, which saves you money down the line, like that, from that advantage, as well as the advantage of that, let's just face it, that costs are cheaper today than they're gonna be a year from now. It's just how it is. So when you always keep in mind time is money, the faster you can do it, the better it's gonna be.
The one piece that, again, I think it speaks to this in this slide a little bit is there could be even a further acceleration of those timelines with third-party financing. The challenge, again, part of the analysis that would have to occur is what is that impact on the county's ability to keep working on all the other projects. A P3 is not going to solve all of our infrastructure needs for whatever the period of that contract is. And so maybe, again, speculating, the county could, yes, we could absolutely afford a local share portion of a P3, but that might dive into the money that they specifically forward fund projects with. So that means everything else that we would typically be used to being accelerated and getting to the market faster might no longer be an option for the county. So yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll have to attach this next time. So this
Blow it up a little bit.
Put it on like 11 by 17, so I'll try to read it. But this is their timeline of all the projects, and I know that that's very hard to see. But we do really map it out by like what has to get done, what year, basically based on age and facility condition, and we start to, and this gets updated annually. But if you're going to do it, you're not going to do all of these in a P3 model. So obviously, all of these other things still have to go on at the same time that we're looking at other things.
And when we're talking high schools, the sheer volume of the money that would be tied up, one after the other.
Well, and like we say, you can only spend $1 once. And so when you spend that dollar, no matter how you spend that dollar, you're locked in for like the next 30 years. Because if you're bond funding it, you're paying on that dollar for 30 years.
I apologize, I ate over to our Board of Health meeting at Winchester Hall, so I will watch the rest of it.
Sure.
Speaking of bonding.
Yes, ma'am.
Does either methodology, either forward funding and/or developing a public-private partnership in any way affect your bond rating?
So I have to defer to my county partner, but I would say if there is any long-term debt service, whether it's a bond that's issued by the county and or state, or some financing contract in the out years, that would be looked at as a liability that would impact their bond ratings.
And obviously, each individual contract is dealt with differently, so we would have to evaluate what's on the table at the time and determine how that impacts our long-term financial outlooks.
And how does it look with the state funding then? So like with the state paying it back, and I mean, because that's we are only able to forward fund so much, and then we wait for the state to catch up, and then if you're adding P3 or kind of moving that around, how does that look as the state funding?
Well, we do, again, it's an annual process that we do. We look at the payback periods on all of our projects because we obviously want to maximize state participation in any of our project because in simple terms, it feeds the bank that allows us to move forward. So we know as soon as the county gets their money back, they're going to invest that right back in our infrastructure. And so we want to make sure that's maximized, and we work closely with the budget staff to make sure that our requests with the state maximize those returns.
Yeah, from what I was told today, these two leave no state dollars on the table. So every state dollar is available. They got it covered somehow, so you have nothing to worry about there.
Well, I just want to make sure it won't risk future ones. How does that work?
We like to say an investment in Frederick County is a wise investment because we really do stack our projects so that we're ready to go, like one right after another. And oftentimes we group projects so that we get our best efficiencies that way. You know, for example, when we did Blue Heron, we did Waverly, they're on the same model. We just make sure that we're always constantly looking to save that dollar because there's a lot of projects that have to get done and we just move right on through them.
And that chart we'd be glad to share too. That was our attempt.
His phone number regarding a possible.
That chart was an attempt for our staff to, well, we use it routinely, but to also provide a visual for our board too of every action that you have on that chart has a reaction with where future projects end up in the out years. And so, again, that's the world we live in. I love that chart. It helps us visualize that's the entire portfolio on one page, right? And how do we have to shift all of our priorities to align with the resources that we are provided. P3 in Maryland, just wanted to touch here. It is one of the options that is open. There are 7 alternative financing methods that are outlined in the education article that are available. And then again, just a definition there from the education article about what the state considers a P3. Again, more specifically, and we've touched on many of these things, so I'll go through these quickly. There have been two rounds in Prince George's County. Round 1 was all locally funded, where they did 6 schools. They did a K to 8 and 5 middle schools, and then round 2, 6 elementary schools and 2 pre-K to 8 buildings as well. And then stole some information from the Interagency Commission on School Construction because they're a wealth of information. So this was a presentation that the IAC received, but it was just sort of a simple terms of how that was going to work for round 2 with what the state's investment would be and what the county's investment would be as well to fund that P3 again. That was those 8 schools, the 6 elementary and the 2 pre-K to 8.
I mean, the biggest part is that last one, that the interest income, like it couldn't be done unless Prince George's County was going to have that interest income.
Yes.
And that did come up with the discussion. We had to go back to the legislator and say, who gets the interest income? The state or, so they ended up with it. But if they didn't end up with that, they wouldn't be able to do it. So that was very important to them.
Absolutely. So that was the sort of broad overview. Again, we'd be happy to discuss more, anything more specific, but thought it was a good primer for a future conversation.
I think it comes up quite frequently anytime we talk to anyone about P3s.
Has the county done any P3s themselves besides this building, like the county itself, roads or anything?
Yeah, and the school system did this building, and it wasn't, we didn't call it a P3, we call it,
It's basically a land lease. So we own the building, but the collateral is the land because we can't incur debt. So we have an annual payment associated with this. Feels more like a mortgage, but that's not how the financing is structured to meet our ability to not have debt.
it's been refinanced a couple times.
Correct.
But you can't pay off the principal.
I do think we can.
Now?
In the final refinancing.
Oh, good, that's good, we
We
tried.
could. If we have a few million, we would love to pay it off.
Missed the boat on that one. Yeah, I was gonna say, we missed the boat on that one.
The wrong house.
Oh, and so, no, not that I can think of, I can't. We're exploring it, so we've had numerous conversations at the staff level about P3s. We've gone to different seminars. We spoke extensively with with some of the people from Prince George's County, specifically Mr. Washington from the school system. And then we also talked to the financier of the Prince George's, the first, and spoke with them. I can't remember the name of the company, and met with them just to get our heads around it all. At this point, we haven't explored anything though.
Their work group did a final report. I've been trying to get it without success.
I was trying to look too, I couldn't even
Yeah,
find the group.
I'd like to try to get it. It might be worthwhile for a future topic to see what their work
Senator,
group.
if I might.
Oh,
Sure.
uh-huh.
Yeah, Senator, thank you. I did get your request for that, and PCDS is pulling a copy of that and send to me so I can forward to the work group. It'll happen in the next day or two.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, my staff asked the right person.
I was even trying to find it to watch some of their meetings and stuff, and I couldn't. Was there anything that you guys wanted to add from like the state perspective on lessons learned, or were there anything, Alex, can you hear me? You or Michael wanted to add as far as other groups or ways of doing things, or?
Yeah, I do have a couple of takeaways from the state perspective if you're looking for that at this time.
Sure.
Okay. What we've learned by researching the history of P3s that are applicable in the K-12 arena, which is really limited to Canada for the most part, is that number one, P3s are very complex. The devil is in the detail. There are thousands of pages of details in a P3 deal that have to be gotten right for the owner to benefit in the way that the owner needs to benefit and expects to benefit. This means that successful management of a P3 by a school district really does require significant insight or internal capacity and expertise up front, a significant portion of which really cannot be provided by outside contractors. And that means that an LEA really must scope the functions and the loads that are involved in being an owner in a P3 arrangement. And the LEA must complete a large amount of prep work before even launching the P3. So there is a certain amount of really capacity building and a capacity assurance internally that has to take place before beginning the procurement process for P3. A couple other takeaways are that one of the primary values is the risk transfer that can come with a P3. They call it a risk sharing approach. The benefit is that long-term costs are It also includes some mix of debt and equity for the vendor or contractor, which does bring some accountability because they have some skin in the game. And another couple of key points here is that the due diligence in all of that math that Paul mentioned, which is he was exactly right, there's a huge amount of math that has to take place before the deal is signed. And it's typically called a value for money calculation, in which the owner has to ask someone. In Prince George's case, they hired outside consultants to do this math for them, where they compare all of the costs that Paul mentioned in terms of ownership costs, including maintenance, operations, and repairs over time, capital renewal over time, of the different options. You escalate and adjust for inflation. You factor in key market concerns and risks you might be able to predict. And you have to go through that math because the difference between saving money and not saving money is could be relatively thin, not razor thin, but it's not necessarily easy to hit that sweet spot. And if the math is not done thoroughly and correctly up front, it's very easy for an owner to step into a P3 where they will not reap the cost savings that they expect to reap. And experiences have shown over the last 20 years, Canada and South America particularly, South America there were not K-12 schools, P3s necessarily, but in Canada there were K-12 school P3s where the owners signed a deal with the private vendor for a 30-year contract, and then at about year 10 realized that they had not structured it in a way that saved the money, that the school district could operate, maintain, and pay for the financing more cheaply, and so terminated the deal early and essentially bought out the vendor in order to save themselves money in the second and third decades of what they thought was going to be a good deal and turned out not to be a good deal. So these things are very tricky. The IAC is essentially agnostic. We believe that it can be done well and it can be done bad. And it may or may not be the tool or the toolbox. It all depends on what the specific needs of the school district are. And in the case of Prince George's, our analysis found that it should be a good match of needs and challenges of Prince George's. It appears that it is something that will get Prince George's more of what it needs sooner, and in what should be an affordable manner. But we don't make any assumptions that that would necessarily be the case for any other county. It really depends on the specifics we're looking to address and what the market will support, because it is possible, Paul said, that there may not be enough capacity in the contractor side of the industry to pull off what the LEA might be needing, wanting, or envisioning. And so there is quite a bit of math and back and forth that would need to be done whether it's good or not for Frederick County. Happy to answer your questions about what's covered in our
Did you want to talk about that now? You want to ask about that now?
I spoke with them at the,
Oh, do you want me to? Yeah. Alex, can you go over the Monarch School and how that was done?
Sure.
Please, thank you.
Monarch School is a school facility in Prince George's County that was, Animal Camp. It was created for a contract school, charter school that was set up to serve students in the county. And because the charter was set up for only a 25-year period, the owners decided that they only needed to spend enough money to build a facility that would last for the term of their service, and did not want to spend on a facility that would last a typical lifespan of a The key takeaway for the IEC is that because the IEC and the state looks at student demand as being perennial or essentially everlasting, the default approach is that we expect that a school district is going to receive greater benefits at lower cost by going with the longer lasting buildings. There hasn't been any math or analysis we've seen that suggests that the total cost of ownership over the long haul is lower by going with construction of the Monarch School type, which would involve needing 2 buildings for 25-year lifespans in order to achieve having the learning environments you need to serve the students for the 50-year period versus 1 building that lasts for 50 plus years. So there hasn't been any subsequent significant interest around the state by any school districts that have shared it with the IEC at least about moving towards constructing school facilities in the manner that the Monarch School was constructed. And my understanding is that my predecessors at the IEC considered it to be a less cost-efficient way to go. However, because it was done for a charter school that only had a 25-year service requirement, there really wasn't a way to say that that was not appropriate. It may be well serving the needs now of that operator. It's not something that we view as a go-to methodology for building a school facility for an LEA. Does that answer the question?
Yes, because we get that question a lot, especially about the materials that we use in our schools and the cost of them and the upfront cost of using something that's going to be either more durable or long-lasting and things like that. We do get that question quite a bit, so that does.
I should add, however, that there are modular construction techniques that can be, that are not the traditional bricks and mortar site built, but rather are constructed off-site, partially or fully assembled, and then brought in to be added to components of a facility on site. And those may well be accessible to school districts in a way that would not have a shorter lifespan necessarily, and might serve the needs over the long haul at a reasonable total cost of ownership. Prince George's County Public Schools has built 1 school using partly modular construction in the last couple of years, and is working on a second building using partially some of the methods now. So there is interest in that is happening, but that's really kind of not the same exact thing as the Monarch building construction, and it is devil in the details there because you need to take a look at which parts of the school facility are being constructed as modular offsite. What systems are included in that? How is that part married to the site build portion? And what are the expected useful lives included? And it may be that certain parts of the school facility lend themselves more to that construction technique than others, and it might not necessarily be a solution to building an entire facility. So it's worth looking into, but I don't know that it's a major option that this Workgroup is. It doesn't rise to the same level as the other construction financing options that the Workgroup is looking at.
Would that be something that could be used or positioned as a, especially if you did the site work in advance for doing an addition? Instead of instead of bringing in portables or something like that, if you leveled site, almost like, how we kind of did some of our design with the wings and things. Is there a way?
In site-specific questions, though, would have to be answered.
Correct. And again, some of it comes down to really the conditions that you're experiencing. Our team has been to see the school, and the name escapes me, that Prince George's County used that for. And really, it's about, it also changes your finance model as well. Again, not a bad thing. You have to have the money up front, right, to be able to get the work going in the field. And then typically, probably the easiest way to describe it is if you think of tilt-up concrete is one of the times that it's often used the most, where the panels are constructed and built outside and then trucked in. And so we have asked our construction managers to look at all options over the last couple. One of our recent project was when diesel prices were absurd, and so the cost of trucking it in would have been more problematic. One of the nice things for Prince George's County, though, was the accelerated timeline that they were on, because they had some issues that drove their timeline to be more consolidated, and so that allowed them to stay on schedule because they were allowed to get the off-site work done, and then they could quickly assemble all of the exterior walls as well. So it is something that certainly exists that not in depth that we've looked at, but it is something we've asked our teams to examine. The last time that we did, it was the cost to get it here would have been more expensive than what had already been planned with traditional masonry.
Well, wasn't it also part of the initial concept for Blue Heron? Do it relying more on prefab components that were brought in, but you had to go away from that because it would have introduced a lot more time in the project. That's what I recall.
I would have to go back and dig through my notes on Blue Heron. We looked at a lot of things with Blue Heron because its construction started it was bid right prior to COVID, and so there were many unique discussions through that period about different options on things. But I'd have to dig through.
One thing I think that we haven't talked about either up until this point is talking about forward funding. The way the state allocates their funds, when the state allocates their dollars, they expect the LEA to spend that money within a reasonable period of time, which is 2 years, and then by the third year, that money has to be returned. Now, it's earmarked and kept in the account for that LEA so that it can be used for a future project, but the money has to go back. And that was what was happening at Prince George's County, because the county made a decision not to forward fund those projects. So the state would be giving their allocations. They couldn't save up. I'm glad that we're in here. Are we on? Yeah. This is a pretty solid building. Yeah. So
We're gonna find out.
yeah. So the state would. Sorry, Alex, we're having a terrible storm right now. It's probably heading in your direction. Anyway, so the state would give their allocation. Prince George's would save that money and try to get the local match so that they could start a project to get that project to fruition. But oftentimes what was happening is they were not getting the local share, and they would have to return the state share to the state to be earmarked for a future project. And this kept going on and on and on for years. It came up during the Knott Commission, it came up at other times. It just happened all the time, and it had been, I don't even remember, Alex, I don't know if you remember how many years had gone by before they were able to complete a major project, but it was a lot, and that's part of the reason why, yeah. Go ahead.
So just a couple quick comments on that to follow up, Shannon. The IAC's rules require that any dollars allocated to a project that are not used in 2 years of the allocation go back into the LEA's reserve account, and then if not used 2 years after that, rolls into the statewide reserve account and be reallocated by the IAC to any LEA's project. What's different now, that has not changed. What's different now from the situation you described with Prince George's is the IAC used to allocate dollars to projects such as Prince George's at an amount greater than the draw schedules for those projects would use over the coming year. And although Prince George's case given the IAC expected those projects to move, and when they didn't, dollars that sit on the shelf. The IC now, dollars in terms of appropriations versus the request levels and the need out there. We have to be very, very detailed and careful in terms of our review of the project readiness and the project draw schedules. The IC is not allocating dollars now to the project unless we're pretty sure that the projects are going to use those dollars in construction fiscal year in which they're being allocated. So there is a much reduced likelihood that the situation shortages will be recurring widely. The only exception to that now is was in fiscal 24 when we got the extra $200 million in appropriations that were not expected. That is figures all year. I did allocate the dollars from projects. Additional dollars in the following years, essentially forward funded project partially. But that's not something we count on and we expect in the future. So I would suggest that LEA should not expect
And then on state funding, is anything like creative that we come up with or anything going to adversely impact our share of state funding?
not that I
we need when we need it. So Waverly Elementary was constructed for over 1,000 students in 2019. That was what we needed in the western side of the city of Frederick, given the growth there. The board also approved recently with Elementary School 41 to design and build that for 882 students as well. And then we would anticipate that would look at another project, middle or high school as well, if that made sense, that our board would want to have that conversation about doing it. So we're not just building, even though again that's the model, which is important for us to have as a staff as well. What would we typically want to design to? But when circumstances exist, our board has shown a desire to expand those parameters so we can better meet those needs. And frankly, from a facilities management perspective, that makes a lot more sense than building on for a future hope when you don't know when that future need is going to exist. And so did that answer your question?
Yeah, that definitely answers, and that was, Alex, can you hear us? That was a Yeah, so Paul just answered very similar to how you answered when I asked the question about building the bigger core or building room for future additions, expansions, and things like that. Is there anything else, like when we're talking about past, present, and future, is there anything that you guys have seen in the future that's coming, anything as far as either from a financing or from a build perspective that would be cost savings? I mean, your board direction, I understand, but.
Cost savings wise, when you first, I thought you were going to stop with your question, and I was going to say, well, there's more kids on the horizon.
Yeah, well, so fastest growing, is that going to meet the needs and all that? Yes.
Yes, we do have some concerns about some potential costs on the horizon associated with changes in both the code and some of the decarbonization initiatives at the state that don't have funding associated with them. Again, that's not a value statement from the staff's perspective. We certainly understand the rationale and the reasoning, but there's no funding behind that, and so we are going to be forced to align with new standards, yet we're not able to meet our existing infrastructure needs. And so that is a funding concern for us in the out years. We're having more and more leveraged on what our buildings must look like, what they must do. And so we're doing less and less for our overall portfolio because the dollars can't be spread as far.
I have a question for you about the implementation of the blueprint. Has that in any way affected school construction costs? I'm thinking, for example, pre-K. And if so, do you think of any adjustments that might mitigate that? Because we did make numerous adjustments this past session, and I would imagine there will be some more.
So, yes, thank you for that question. Let's start with pre-K and then we'll talk more, if that's okay, than just pre-K. Some of the challenge for us is a little bit of the unknown with what all of our demands will be for pre-K space. We're a little better in terms of our private providers, but not very good at all. It's still less than, you can still fit them on one hand, the number that are participating, right? And so that initial partnership that the state thought would exist is not coming to fruition in the same manner that it would. And so we know that we will have future pre-K needs, but how to quantify that is challenging given the language of the blueprint in terms of meeting those who are at the 600% and then the 300% on the sliding scale. Right now, we're able to meet 100% of our pre-K needs, which is wonderful. I think what you'll hear commonly in Frederick County is we try to get as innovative and creative as we can. We've done our creative pre-K model where we've implemented classrooms at our high school, which was the old child development classes. We're not at 100% of our high schools that we're using pre-K seats in those high schools yet. But I suspect in the next couple of years we'll be full there. And so it does have a driver for the out years for us, but it is hard for us to quantify today that in 2027 I know I'm going to need more pre-K seats that I can't that I can predict right now. So what you will see and appreciate both the county and the state recognizing this in our EFMP, we have a placeholder in the out years so we collectively don't forget about this need that is out there that we don't currently have. We certainly don't want to build it in areas when we have lots of other needs, and so that is part of our 10-year plan. There's a placeholder series of projects that we will continue to shift based on the information that we have at the time. In addition to that, Senator, is things like career technology education. That has been a huge need in Frederick County. We turn away 500-ish plus students a year, and I say ish because I would argue that I think we would turn away a whole lot more if we could expand the programs to meet the ever-growing demand, right? So it's again hard to quantify what that exact number is, but today with the existing programs and the existing building, we're turning away over 500 students that have a desire to attend a career technology education program in our Career and Technology Center. That sits right adjacent to Frederick Community College. So that's another driver of future blueprint cost to make sure that we're in alignment with all of the requirements.
Along with that, can we get the 500 number, like what programs are being from CTC, like which ones are full and everything like that? Because I know that is on the county executive's mind as well. And then, so I did find these. Do you have any of the, I found them on the website as far as what, and they're great. I'll attach them. It's pillar 3 and 4, which is the college and career readiness. Do you have one that does anything about the pre-K or anything too?
That is one of the other pillars, and
Yes.
I can get that to Catherine to put. It's a link to our website.
Okay. Yeah, any that impact, any of the blueprint pieces that, and so we can kind of see where we are and where we're going with them, that especially impact capital, would be helpful for us to see where we are with them. Do you? Well, that's a whole different thing with partnerships and all that kind of thing, which is really exciting. But is there any other worries that you have from a CTE in the building standpoint, not just the center, but as far as planning for either the apprenticeship or how we're doing the certifications and the sheer numbers that we have to do for that?
Well, we would certainly expand programs at our comprehensive high schools as well, but we're at about 100% capacity at our high schools, and so the ability to expand even there is a challenge. Just to add, again, to highlight some of the complexities, it's not just as simple as having, if we had a building, what would that look like? We have to have the staff and the resources to be able to support whatever those programs are. So if we were able to expand any one of the programs that you'd like, that comes with a teacher and materials of instruction, and that's an ongoing cost almost in perpetuity because it'll have a driver for future enrollments by our high schoolers. And so we don't frankly have the space to expand in a significant in a significant way at our comprehensive high schools, although again, creativity and any way that our administrators can do it, if there is a need that they can fulfill and centrally it can all be supported, we're going to expand it at one of those comprehensive high schools. But again, it's so unique about which program it is, how can we do it, can we fill it, and make sure we're not taking away space that's needed for other core requirements to meet graduation.
And then another state issue that may have capacity things, are you looking at what the state superintendent was saying about the 3rd grade and the proficiency and not moving kids on as fast and what that would do to capacity, especially with recent? It's very new. I don't know if you guys have looked at it or talked about it.
So our partners in our school administration and system accountability probably have had some more in-depth conversations. My initial reaction would be that probably doesn't necessarily have a facility cost in the immediacy. It might over the long term, and the reason I say that in immediate is if you just had as an example 1 year where you had a larger third grade class, it doesn't increase your total number of classrooms needed because you would then have less in fourth grade.
Right.
Right, and so the question is, over the long term, what would that look like as you continue to add enrollments? At some point, you will have a grade that leaves with less students in it, and there's a larger number behind it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So wouldn't feel the pinch likely immediately, but as that happened
some
over
point.
time, it could create capacity challenges.
Especially
yes.
with increasing numbers and growth around, depending on the school.
Plus, if you saw the article yesterday, Frederick is number 5 or number 6 on a couple of different education evaluations, so we shouldn't be affected as much by that assessment.
Kids are smart.
Our kids are smart.
Our kids are smart. That's the short
Yes, they are. Yes,
Because our teachers are good.
Good, right?
yes, yes. Anyone else have anything for that? Have you, on the IAC, is there
Well, I mean,
anything?
I guess I'm looking at it like, if you had the funds right now, do you know what projects have to be done?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Like tomorrow.
What was the question?
If you have the funds right now, do you know what projects have to be done? Like, I mean, it's not like, I'm just saying it's not like an internal fight that we want this one done and not one done, and I mean, you guys are all in agreement that, you know.
And I think to just, if I could be very specific for you, when the, it's not Blueprint, I'm sorry.
Built to learn.
Built to Learn, thank you. When the Built to Learn Act was passed, we had all of our projects in prioritization from the board in line, that we were able to accelerate that with the county meeting their local match really quickly. So we accelerated paybacks for Waverly, the state share, and Brunswick Elementary. And so that then fed the bank again, right, which allows us to get to forward funding other projects that we're currently in design on with things like Yellow Springs. Yellow Springs isn't receiving Built to Learn money, but the payback that the county got from Waverly and Brunswick allowed that to then accelerate. And so for the first time in a long time, actually, the county is not forward funding 2 projects, Green Valley and Valley, because Built to Learn Act gave 100% of those dollars that were needed for the state share and made them available in the year of construction, right? So we didn't need it. It wasn't the county's unwillingness. We didn't need it. Again, then that allowed Yellow Springs to accelerate, to get to design and then construction faster, as well as Middletown, middle and elementary as well.
Waverly, what, 2 years ago?
2020, it was passed, I believe.
2022, that's what I had, that was,
It didn't roll out a bit longer. However, the key thing is, Frederick County really positioned itself well because of the, consistent long-term planning to take advantage of the Built to Learn Act. I would just note that the Built to Learn Act funding was a burst. It was a one-time funding program that will not be recurring. So it's not something that we can count on being able to do again with multiple projects. That was really a sweet spot first, and you've all done really well with that. But it's not going to be continuing as far as I can tell.
Is there other, I know that the federal, there was some federal dollars toward capital. Is there any federal dollars that we know for school construction that is out there, or?
I know that came up. Go ahead. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
So I'm happy to describe what you're seeing in the Inflation Reduction Act reimbursement options, but I can summarize from the state perspective. The federal IRA direct pay reimbursement is available for specific components in projects that improve energy efficiency and decarbonize facilities. And whenever an LEA is doing a project with those components, depending on the components selected and the construction methodologies, the LEA should be able to take advantage of.
But it is certainly not funding an entire,
Right. It's just,
it's components of a project, yes.
But if you free up with federal money components of the project, will that free up then money that goes back in the pot that you can use for other projects sooner?
Yeah, I mean, every penny helps, but it's not large enough.
There could be solar panels or something like that.
Correct.
Plus the fact that a lot of the decarbonization mandates are incremental. So yes, if we get other sources, and I was thinking as you talked that there's a state pool of money for decarbonization efforts that hasn't been allocated to schools yet. So maybe that's a possible legislative initiative. But yeah, if you've got requirements in that area that are relatively new, it's almost a swap.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I just want to point out that, you know, with the Build to Learn Act, there was an infusion of $2 billion into the state for school construction. And Frederick County's share of that $2 billion was $100 million. Not that that is a small amount. We were very appreciative to get that money. But that is our qualified share of a $2 billion investment. So the likelihood of another investment of another $2 billion on top of what has already been invested, and another $100 million for Frederick County, which would get us one high school.
If that now.
Yeah.
I just want to make it
It's
very
slim to none.
clear that that's just not going to happen in the foreseeable future. So I think that everybody needs to realize the scope and magnitude of the problem. And then the other thing that everybody says when they talk to me, they get depressed. So I'm sorry if I'm depressing anybody. True. But that's my job. So
I like you.
But one of the things that I think everybody has to realize too is as we talk about these larger projects that have to get done in Frederick County and around the state, because we are not the only LEA who is dealing with big high schools that have to get renovated. And I'm just going to use this for an example. So our roughly 5% share, and the IAC tells us to estimate approximately $15 million of an allocation every year. And that's about what we use in our preliminary planning. And sometimes that goes up, and sometimes, well, I shouldn't say it goes down. It usually goes up, and we do get some EGRC money, excessive growth or relocatable classroom funding.
3 million or something like that.
Right. So we usually get a little bit more than that. But to do a high school, and I'm just going to use round figures, if the high school is $160 million, and let's just say eligible costs, it works out to be roughly a 50-50 split between the county and the state. So you're talking about an $80 million state project. And again, we get that funding incrementally over the course of several years. So even if we got, like, say, $10 million a year, and that is a lot to be allocated toward one project in 1 year, out of a total allocation of $15 million, it would take us 8 years of state funding to pay for one project. We haven't talked about everything else that's on that list.
Right.
And so I just wanted to remind everybody, like, we really are trying to get that state share faster than 8 years. We're trying to get that state share within one CIP, 6 years. We just aren't going to be able to do that when we're talking about multiple high school projects and multiple, like right now, we could maybe do that for our next high school that has to get done, and we can get that state share, but we still owe on Middletown Combination School, and we still owe on Yellow Springs. The state's still going to be repaying that share. So without some sort of influx of additional funding, we are going to be challenged to continue at the pace that we're continuing to pay these.
Well, even at the state level, I mean, there's been years that they don't do a high school. Yeah, there's not a high school, under construction, so, because they're so expensive. And, I mean, I got a little report where it says by 2029, this county and 3 others, or 2 others, would be over 100% capacity. And over 90 be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 would be at 90 or above capacity by 2029.
Is that only high schools or just?
Yeah, it's all the schools.
All the schools.
All the schools, yeah.
When we get our
Well, also, our state capacity is different than local capacity because you guys may have classrooms that you don't count that we do count, or vice versa, or something like that. So it's, yeah,
Well, and
it's
are
a little
you-
bit different.
Are you guys counting pre-K now?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
There is a formula to count pre-K classrooms in the state rated capacity. Generally, our capacity aligns exactly with the state's. We don't typically use a separate calculation.
And that's newer with the pre-Ks. Yeah.
When we get our allocation of state funding, is that based on our current capacity or current enrollment and our projections? And does that take into consideration our rapid growth? Because Frederick County is growing faster than any other county in the state. And I know for operating, it does not. What about for capital? Does it adequately look at our rapid rate of growth?
I don't know if Alex wants to answer that, but I was always told that we have roughly 5% of the state's population and we get 5% of the pot. And so our 5% is roughly 15 million, if I'm not mistaken.
But our school enrollment is growing at 2.5 times faster than the second highest rate of growth.
You know where that fix comes. You want to say it again? Want to ask the question again?
Okay. When we get our allocation of funding, where I know you're looking at current enrollment, to what extent do you factor in our rate of growth? Because I know this is a problem for operating budget, that our allocations for our operating budget are based on student enrollment for the prior September. So it doesn't take into consideration our rate of growth, which is 2.5 times greater than the second fastest growing county in the state. Is that phenomenon occurring for school construction funding also?
That's a great question. It's a complicated one. I'm going to try to cover a couple different aspects in response. First is the state funding is broken up into a couple of different programs. One is the CIP, another is the enrollment growth and relocatables program funding, which is appropriated separately. And the two programs provide allocation to Frederick County a little bit differently. The current enrollment projections from the Maryland Department of Planning find Frederick County projected to grow, enrollment to grow by 8.1% over the coming roughly decade, which is the third fastest growth rate of the counties in the state projected for the coming years. And the CIP takes that into account at the project funding level through the state local cost share, which is derived from a 7-factor formula, one of the factors of which is difference in the local enrollment, projected enrollment growth versus the statewide average growth. So for that factor, Frederick County, an added component to its state cost share amount based on its high growth. And separately, we have the enrollment growth relocatable appropriation, which is about $40 million a year, that is split across the counties with the high growth. And for Frederick County, we have an amount that comes out to be, I'm just scanning down my list here, trying to get the right number.
I have it here, Alex. It's like $2,981,000.
Thank you, Mike.
I came prepared.
We have, in the 23, it was a little bit less, it was about 15 million. And so the EGRC program is specifically intended to add dollars at the LEA level for the LEAs that have that high growth and or a lot of relocatables still in service. Now, it's a sort of a policy level question as well as that enough. And there's going to be a third mechanism by which funding will flow to high growth areas like Frederick County, be starting in fiscal 2028 with the priority fund, which is going to direct state dollars to projects for the highest need schools in the state, which will include both condition deficiency needs and capacity deficiency needs against growth or projected enrollment. And so I would expect Frederick County to have some projects that will become eligible under that program as well. The last thing I'll mention here is that the state local cost share is coming up for revision by the IEC in the coming 12 months, potentially, or a little bit less. Prior to next summer, the IEC is going to do a full evaluation of the state local cost share formula and probably adopt, presumably, a revised formula approach there. So there will be LEA engagement input process set up for that coming months, and you'll get more information in the coming few weeks about that. So there are a number of ways that we're trying to grapple with the needs out there, including growth and capacity related needs.
That sounds great. Thank you, Alex. That's good news. Yeah.
Well, maybe our,
Good.
Mostly good.
maybe our first recommendation should be that a population growth factor be added to the school funding formula.
Well, and that's something that has to come from the state, and
Yeah.
from you guys.
I
So,
did that bill last year. You want to cross-file it?
Yeah, let's do that.
well, I mean, that's what I'm like, with our, with our commission, we can only
Yeah.
fund what you guys give us. So the more tools you give us,
Yep.
the more funding that can happen. So that's a huge factor. I know not everything comes from the state, but if you're worried about, the population growing so fastly, like the EGRC was for that. So if you can develop another program that just is dedicated to high growth, you may benefit from that way. Like on this one, there's 1, 2, I think 9 or 10 counties that qualify, either from enrollment or from because they have the relocatable also. So you guys are, most of them are enrollment, 4 just because they have so many relocatable units. So, and that's $40 million between that group.
Okay. You ready for that? Are you
I
gonna?
gotta do
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
I'm
Very.
gonna go home and write it.
Yeah, he's gonna go home and write that out now. Hopefully, you can take your boat.
See you later.
All right. Coming up on a little. Oh,
Apologize.
Oh, go ahead. No.
Try not to speak out of turn, but it just went to Member Derenberg's comment. It might be interesting for the legislature to consider the factors associated with EGRC in terms of the relocatable portion of that, because that's a strictly raw number, right? And so it's really geared at larger LEAs, and it may be a consideration where you look at, a factor of percentage of overall square footage in comparison to the portfolio. It's very easy, as an example, for Montgomery County Public Schools to be at 200 portables. 200 portables in Frederick would mean something very different than 200 in Montgomery County, and the threshold is just a raw number.
Is that something then we would do through legislation? Then okay. And so yeah, anything.
Sorry.
No, that's
Speak out of turn, just-
no, that's great. Happy to help. All right. Okay, and then moving on, so there was a lot with that. Moving on then to just the member discussion then. You want to take your idea?
There's this big fancy topic title that really just represents an acorn of an idea, so I'll be very upfront about that. But this is, this group is intended to address the long-term picture, right? And part of our long-term picture is a plan that we approved about a year ago, the South Frederick Corridor Plan, for the intensive redevelopment of a triangular area in the county just south of Frederick City here, right? And it's adopting a new form of development called form-based development. So right now, our traditional approach to zoning separates geographically by use. So we'll have a residentially zoned area over here, an industrial and commercially zoned area over there. Under form-based zoning, and I'm going to really butcher what form-based, the form-based code means here, is that you're kind of setting aside the differentiation by use within the geography. So now you're combining uses in greater and lesser degrees of intensity in that area. So to be more specific, you're putting the residential, the commercial, and the employment all proximate to each other. And you're doing that because you're recognizing that they're all mutually beneficial to each other. You have the commercial has the residential customer base right embedded with it, who also may be employees in the employment section, who then benefit also from the the commercial space nearby. So why am I mentioning any of this? So when we were reviewing this at the council level, kind of got to thinking that, well, under this concept, you're embracing the notion that commercial and employment benefit from being co-located with residential in this higher intensity redevelopment model. But the only way that residential can be there is if there's enough schools. And only in our current, way of thinking about how we residential development contributes to schools, they're the only ones who face that responsibility. So commercial and employment may get the benefit of having residential, but only the residential component is responsible for the schools that they require. Okay. And to make all this happen, we're going to really have to rethink our adequate public facilities ordinance. There's no question about it. But this plan envisions 10,000 new residential units in this area of the county that has very little residential right now. And you can start to think about what that's going to mean for school capacity proximate to that area to service it. And so the thought was that as we re-envision what our APFO will need to have in it to address all of the implications for the South Frederick Corridor and this form-based development, we ought to also be thinking about sharing more of the burden of the school requirements with these other sectors, commercial and employment, that currently don't have any responsibility other than through property taxes because of the mutually beneficial nature of this high-intensity combination of all three of these uses in this area. So it would be, some, re-envisioned potentially, form of an impact fee that new non-residential development within there would also share with the residential development to enable us to build the school capacity required by this kind of redevelopment concept. So that's really the start and the end of it in terms of the amount of thinking. I know I did talk about this concept with Kim Gaines, our Livable Frederick program manager. And if it's not being, in their thought processes at the staff level, I'll just keep pinging them and reminding them. Because we've got a lot of code. They're working through a lot of code changes to address the implications of the South Frederick Corridor.
Well, and not only seeing it as a I mean, when you're talking about a mixed use like that, but also seeing it as an opportunity, when we've got this pillar, we've got the college and career readiness, if you're talking about businesses being there. I don't know, that's an interesting, it might not just be a burden, but an opportunity. And then are these already figured into the enrollment projections in that area? Do we know? No, that's not. The South
We're so
Florida
far
one?
out.
There's
So far out, it's not
Site
even.
plans.
And this is a 30-year vision, right?
okay.
And how we get from here to there is still a very kind of undefined thing, right? Because it's an existing use. It's an area with existing uses. So what will happen is that this, kind of overlay, kind of plan with associated revisions to our codes, which is kind of being thought of now, and will continue to be thought of for probably quite some time, it's going to make available the redevelopment potential of the area that currently cannot be done under our current codes and zoning. How the private sector then takes advantage of it, and in what kind of time frame, we really can't predict right now. So this really is kind of it's a subset of our long-term challenge in a very in what will be a very intensive area that will be very challenging to deal with to itself. So.
This would be,
Yeah, go ahead.
so this would be a conversation at the county council level, or as you're thinking about this
Yeah, it would have to be.
plan. And then you mentioned the APFO as well, and some needs for revisions around that. Is that conversation happening at the?
I think staff is chewing on that now. I don't know if they've actually got draft code they're starting to work through. I would kind of think not yet. Yeah. But it's something that they're going to be wrestling with, because there's just myriad changes in the APFO not to deal with, not just about schools, because like, for example, and I don't want to take this too far off the school topic, but, because, development is a little bit more, geographically separated right now. They're a bit more responsible, singularly responsible for certain types of infrastructure, right? Whereas in this other redevelopment concept, now there's so much more beneficial sharing of that common infrastructure. How do you allocate mitigation responsibility to one development versus another? It has to be a much more blended approach. And our APFO just doesn't address that at all like that right now.
Cities needs revision as well, because that's where the majority of the growth is.
Well, and I think that brings up a good point, is that, from a planning perspective, the Livable Frederick Master Plan is very visionary in that it looks out 30 or 40 years, like in the future. And there will be a lot of changes that come about because of that plan. What the school system and the county deal with is what's in front of, we have to think long range, but we have to deal with our issues today. And so you have to find a way to marry that within your financial modeling and everything else that we look at. And we do try to do that. It's taken into consideration in the projections that are done through the school system, and we get those projections, and then we also use that modeling in our budgeting, and we do try to take all that into consideration. But you can't always anticipate exactly where the hiccups are going to occur. Who knew that in 2014 we were going to have a change to our APFO that allowed a fee in lieu that caused $25,000 housing units to be approved, and then all of a sudden we have to accommodate that. You just have to deal with changes as they come down the pike. Everybody wants Frederick to grow, everybody wants Frederick to evolve, and it's a balancing act. I think everybody has just realized, if you haven't figured it out yet, it is clearly a balancing act between how do you do that responsibly and put your infrastructure in so that your amenities come reasonably concurrent with the demand. And sometimes we do better than others, and, you know, we're really good with it when it comes to water. Like, we don't usually over allocate our water. We're very careful about it. We do tend to over allocate our schools sometimes.
And the
And the growth, and thank you for bringing that up, because it leads into, so for our next meeting, I thought to invite the municipalities, all of our municipalities, because they all kind of factor into that, and we'll have those conversations for the next meeting, which I have tentatively, and you guys can let me know who it works for or who it doesn't over the next week or two, is September 26th at 5 p.m.
Or 6, or
Yeah, 5,
or maybe
6,
a day
6,
later, or
5.
maybe.
We're trying
I'll
for
wait till the final
5.
email. That's all.
Yeah, wait 3 days and then you'll see the final email. Our schedule's changing. This is a hard group to get everyone on the same page, trust me.
I'm going to say yes right now.
Yes, right now? Okay. So, yeah, and then I was looking at for then October, I was thinking around that week of the 18th, I don't remember which was the Thursday. And Thursday seemed to work, 17th. I was kind of looking to that. So if you guys will let me know the availability for both of those, and then just trying to keep it consistent at 5 would be great. And then as far as future agenda and topics, I mean, part of this is going to be really driven by what ideas that we come up with, right? And so we have to find a way to keep listening and having those discussions. So that's what, if you guys have ideas that you want to go on the agenda, you know, just like Councilman McKay did, just let me know. And then we'll start a list and we'll start a sheet.
When we were out at NCSL, I talked to some of the staff of the education group. I'm on that group, and I asked them about best practices and state approaches to school construction. And they actually sent me some pretty extensive work on that. Apparently, they had done they had produced a paper on it in December 9th, 2022, and it was just updated on August the 12th of this year.
Okay.
So since we have limited alternatives to look at in the state of Maryland, it might be worthwhile looking at a state and see if NCSL has a collection of any ideas that might supplement our investigation.
That would be great. Can you share that, Karen? Do you have the report? Can you share that? That would be great. Thank you. And then we'll see when to put that on the agenda to look at topic-wise either.
Yeah, it might be too lengthy for the next meeting.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a topic all of its own agenda. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then, so then moving on to public comment. Do we have public comment? Do we have the list? No.
There is no list.
All right.
I'll try
Yeah.
to keep it short and
Then
sweet.
just, say your name and everything so we know when. Wait, hold on, Hope. There you go.
Sorry. Okay. Hope Bonato, Brunswick High School New Build Committee Chairperson. One of the things I want to ask is, you know, as we're having this committee with all the different partnerships, I really think it'd be important to have Jessica Fitzwater here as well, because she does hold a lot of interest in where we are and to kind of see where things are going. One of the key things that I kept hearing tonight was trying to save the dollar. We have to look at cost-benefit analysis. There's been a lot of discussion also here tonight about more about growth than capital renewal. And our timeline by Janice was really helpful because we've done at least 3 work groups at this point to kind of look at our school system. And we have $800 million in capital renewal backlog, and we have $525 million in capital maintenance backlog. That's not even looking at growth. And so my question at this point is wondering, you know, 10 years we've been looking at this, why are we at this point? And I've been reading the comprehensive maintenance plans, and they're very well written, as Paul will attest to. And this has been a trend. This is not a new thing that popped up this past year. So that is a big question. I know recently Brunswick High School, yes, I will talk about that, had flooring replaced. They had sewage problems. They also have water coming into the windows. The 2019 study showed that it was riddled with problems. We're 5 years down the road. So a talk about saving the dollar cost-benefit analysis. We are pouring good taxpayer monies into patching up this school that is horrendous in 2019 and worse now. My daughter can take a shower in the locker rooms after her practices. She's going to go to practice tomorrow morning at 5:15, and she's going to practice in the morning and then be sweaty and disgusting all day because the showers are used as storage areas, and it is brown water in there. So we have taxpayer money that's coming in, and I will be talking with Jessica about get this moving. There's money there. We all know it. Board of Ed knows it, county knows it, state knows it. We need to fund BHS right now.
Is there anyone else that would like to give a public comment? Thank you. All right, then I guess then that means the meeting is adjourned then. All right, thank you all.